Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What Culture. This is your horror podcast hosted by me, Ash Millman, and joined by she, Kirsten Rhea. Say hello, Kirsten.
Hello.
And he, Josh Brown. Say hello, Josh.
Hello, Josh.
Ah, lovely. So we've all come to you today with some more lovely spooky stuff that we're going to talk about. And today the topic is horror movies that are better at home. Since we are all stuck at home at the moment with the world events that are going on, cinema isn't really an option. So I kind of wanted to explore the difference between cinema horror films and home horror films and what we prefer and kind of how that kind of affects our experience of horror movies and whether they can be better at home or better in the cinema, or whether there's bad experiences for both and, film is just a cursed medium. So I'm just going to open it up straight away by saying, if I just asked you guys straight at the start of this podcast, do you prefer cinema horror movies or home horror movies? What would you say? And I'll ask you again at the end when we've gone to all the points as well. So what would you pick?
Who's going? Josh, you going or am I going?
You want me to go? Okay, I'll jump in.
You go.
Because I'm conflicted on it. That's why I was going to go second, because I don't know. Because they're practically two different things in my eyes. Cinema horror films are a completely different beast to at-home horror films. And if you asked me last year, I would have said always at home, because I had completely broken ties with the cinematic experience. It was just not for me anymore. I had such a terrible year with moviegoers ruining films, especially horror movies. I felt like every single audience I got for every major horror release was just terrible. They were either slopping food down themselves, laughing at the wrong bits, or just being a nuisance. But then this year came around, which is quite ironic considering the situation we're all in right now. And then I was completely won over. I'm not going to talk about it because we talk about it on every single podcast, but The Invisible Man was awesome. The Lighthouse, seeing that with a packed theater was so fun. And when we all went as stir crazy as the characters did in the movie. Like at first, I didn't know what I was in for, and then when I realized it was going to be as fun as it was grim, the sort of like the atmosphere in the cinema turned where we all couldn't really believe what we were watching. So with that in mind, I'd kind of been won around to it, and I think there's nothing better than sharing like an experience with an audience when it comes to horror. We were talking last week about jump scares, and the relief that comes after a jump scare, for instance, works even more if you've got people to experience that with. And there's nothing better than having a completely packed cinema opening night, all excited for what you're going to see. I think that's very important, experiencing it. But that is kind of like finding a unicorn at times, I will admit. Like sometimes if you go to a big mainstream release, for some reason, they always seem to have bad audiences if you don't get it right. If you go on a random Saturday when everyone's just kind of looking for something to watch, and that's kind of like, horror is so accessible, which is great because it means it gets so many people in, but also it's bad because it means chances just go in and then ruin your time by throwing popcorn at your head. But yeah, so to be honest, I could go either way, but I find there are pros and cons for each.
I feel like you've encapsulated the whole podcast in your one, like, it's self-explanatory discussion there. But yeah, no, there's some good points for both. Kirsten, do you have a choice straight away whether it's going to be cinema or home for you?
So for me, I prefer watching things from home because I like having the comfort of my own home. I have a good setup at home. I've got my surround sound. I've got my big ass TV and stuff. And so for me, I like having that comfort of being able to be like, oh, what should I watch today? What should I watch tonight? Get my pajamas on, getting comfy, and knowing that hopefully nothing can go wrong. I don't have distractions. I don't have rude people. I don't have ignorant people there with me, apart from maybe my mum and my brother, who love to ask questions every 5 seconds when we're watching a movie. But apart from that, it's a fun experience. And I always know that if I'm not enjoying something, I can turn it off. I can swap it to something else. And I've not wasted tons of money on food and snacks and the actual experience itself. Whereas I think that's the only down point with going to the cinema, is that you are paying a lot of money for pretty much everything, which could very easily be ruined by some very small things like rude people, the film itself not being good. And then even if you're not having a good time, you'd feel kind of obligated to just sit there and forcefully enjoy it, because otherwise you're out of pocket. Basically, you've spent money on something that you're just going to walk out on, so you feel just like you have to enjoy it. Whereas that's when you're at home, it's comfy, it's cozy. If I don't like something, I can turn it off, I can put on a different horror film. So yeah, for me, it's always been a home experience for me. But if there is a film that I think is really, really good or something I've really been looking forward to, then yes, 100% I will go out of my way, get the whole gang together, and we'll go to the cinema and watch it. And it is an amazing experience, but it has to be something that I know is going to be 100% good. It's going to be definitively good. Otherwise, I'm just not going to take that risk. I'm sorry.
I love going to the cinema to see a bad horror movie. I don't know what it is. I love going and watching a really bad one at the cinema. Like the best ones, I think, are all ones that I've watched at home, but I will spend my money on terrible ones to just go, oh, what's going on here? Because I know I can't escape once I'm in the cinema. I'm like, I've committed to watching the whole thing. So I guess maybe that's a different sadist way of viewing it. But I think horror is such a particular genre for asking this question about, because it's such a specific feeling that you're trying to elicit watching a horror movie. Setting up at home, I think, lends itself really well to specific like subgenres of horror. So like if you want to watch a home invasion movie, it's going to be 10 times more effective if you're watching it at home than if you go and see it in a cinema, or found footage and that sort of thing as well. And I think that horror as well knows very much it is a party genre where loads of people come over together, hang out, have food, talk over it, have a good time. Like horror comedies kind of bank on that aspect of enjoying horror movies communally. So I think it's a really interesting one to debate for this kind of topic, because the horror market is one that angles itself very hard at home audiences, and lots of Netflix and Amazon Prime and that sort of thing put a lot of stock in horror movies and putting horror movies on of their channels because they know people are watching them at home. I just think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting. Obviously, we're all fans and do go to the cinema as well. I think probably the best place to kind of slot this in would be to talk about and have a nice reminisce on cinema experiences where maybe it has benefited horror a little bit more before we move on to the ones that are like perfect home movies, because the cinema has so many merits to it, as you guys have explored, and the experience of going all together, the getting it a bit early and actually getting to see it when it comes out on time as well is always a treat. So you're all talking about it. It's a book, like when It came out and everyone had a buzz talking about it together. That was very good. But yeah, what would you say that you kind of missed from the cinema days that was so long ago when we could go and see horror movies? What were your favorite experiences there, and why was that improved by cinema?
It's funny you should mention it, actually, Ash, because it's not one that I've actually wrote down for you, so I'm going to throw you a curveball right now. But you sparked a memory, because I had seen that when it first came out. I went with my girlfriend and we really enjoyed it and stuff. But a few of my friends hadn't, and they didn't catch it when it came out on DVD. And then we went to one of these all-night horror movie events that happen every year in Newcastle, and they were showing it. It was only a few months after launch. And it was like, I think it was about 12 p.m. or something. It was quite a late showing. And we all sat down in this kind of packed theater. It had a kind of like a lighter vibe. Obviously, like some people had been drinking. We'd watched some movies before. And that was such a joy to experience in that kind of environment. It felt so unique to anything I'd experienced before, because sometimes I feel there's a lot of pressure, like you were saying, Kirsten, for you to enjoy something at the cinema, or for that first experience to be exactly what you've envisioned in your head. I get a lot of anxiety when I go to the theater if I'm really looking forward to something, because I want it to be perfect. I want the film to be good, and I also want the atmosphere to be good. But because I'd seen this movie once before, the weight was kind of off, and I could just enjoy it, and I could enjoy other people's reactions, and it was such a satisfying experience, and kind of made me actually like the movie more because other people were liking it. I don't know if you guys find that, but yeah, like the way that people were responding to it made me think it was a better movie, and I came out enjoying it even more than the first time.
Yeah. There's something to be said for everyone being together and reacting to things. If people are like screaming and going, oh my gosh, in the cinema, then I'm going to be 10 times more like invested in the actual scares that are happening. And the jump scare thing, like we spoke about last week, I think having that as a communal experience makes them 10 times more effective and enjoyable rather than annoying. If a film has too many jump scares and it's getting on your nerves, you're going to notice that 10 times more if you're at home than if you're in a cinema with, there's always a group of like 13-year-old girls that should not be in there that are screaming as loud as they can. And like, it's a love-hate relationship with those guys. I was one at one point, so I can't slam it too much. But when you're in there and you're like, I want to be serious about this horror movie, it either essentially the direction, it's like, oh my god, it's so spooky, or please shut up. Like, and I think that's kind of an interesting part for the cinema time. But yeah, it is a great one. I know you had that down that you wanted to talk about as well, Kirsten.
Yeah, so it was probably the last film that I saw, apart from maybe Star Wars, I think, but it was the last horror film that I saw in the cinema. And I remember getting so hyped for it when I saw the trailer, and I was super, super excited. And it was coming out around my birthday. And so for my birthday, that's when we were like, right, for my birthday, we're all going to go see it. And my mum is a huge horror fan, and so are both my brothers. My dad, it's not so much. And my poor brother's girlfriend absolutely hates horror movies, but we still dragged her along anyway. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that I do love about going to the cinema is just that sheer excitement that you have, that you don't, that's the only thing that you don't really have when you're watching something at home. You're like, oh, let's watch this. And you just kind of plod yourself down and watch it. But when you're going to the cinema, you get so hyped up and it's like, oh, I'm so excited, it's going to happen. And then you have all the trailers and stuff come in. And, you know, even though you kind of want to skip past the trailers at the same time, it's nice to have those because it's the tension's building up and stuff. And yeah, for me, watching it in the cinema was such a brilliant experience because you don't have that home comfort. And for a horror film, that's what makes it even scarier, is that you know that you're not in the comfort of your own home. You're not technically safe. You're in somewhere that you don't know with random people. You know, what if someone comes in dressed as a clown halfway through? I don't know. It could happen. Like, it happens. So it's just that kind of uncertainty that you have sitting in a really, really dark cinema with all this sound around you, with people that you know and care about. And like Josh said, watching their reactions, watching my brother's fiance's reactions, it was like the first horror film she'd ever seen. So yeah, every now and then I was kind of sneaking around looking at her saying, you know, is she actually enjoying this? Because I thought she was going to be walking out halfway through, and yeah, she made it through the whole film, and she even came out afterwards saying like, actually that was really, really good, I really enjoyed myself. So I think I converted her after that day. But it's just, yeah, I mean, it just worked brilliantly in the cinema, and I haven't had that kind of sheer terror in a long, long time, because it was just so nice just being able to just experience his, I mean, he's terrifying, and having that massive scary face on such a huge screen, it almost feels like it is kind of bellowing towards you, and you don't kind of get that when you're at home. So I think some movies do work brilliantly in the cinema. As much as I like being at home, watching it in the cinema was just, it was such a brilliant experience. I was so excited and I came out so happy. I was not disappointed even in the slightest. It was way better than the original in my eyes. And yeah, I was super, super happy. And that's the best thing about going to the cinema, is when you come out and you're like, yes, money well spent. That was incredible. Instead of coming up being like, what the hell have I just wasted my money on? Nothing worse.
No, I get that. I think something that I've kind of put down for cinema stuff to talk about, I think a really interesting part of cinemas as a whole at the moment is that some of them like rely on gimmicks and having like different screens and stuff, like Screen X and the whole the wriggly one, I forget what it's called, like 4DX maybe, where you're in the seat and it's going all over the shop. And there was two films I saw in those formats, and one was Annabelle Comes Home, which was where the screen was stretched all the way around the room. The film wasn't, it just had occasional zoom-ins on the walls on either side, which was a bit weird, but it made it that much more interesting and engaging to watch. And Godzilla King of the Monsters, which I classify as a horror movie because it fits in the monster B-movie, you know, big smash 'em up genre of horror that it was born in, so I'm still putting that in here. And that was in the seats, and I was almost sick from it throwing me around so much, but it made the experience so much more interesting and engaging, and something I would never have had at home. Which I think is just something to celebrate about cinemas, when they throw weird things in there and they bring people together, like you say, with you talking to your friends and family and stuff, and turning them onto horror and having that shared experience where you can all look back and go, oh my god, that was something we all had together, that was really fun. And that kind of happened with Annabelle Comes Home and Godzilla King of the Monsters as well, because it was just like, I survived the crazy chair of Godzilla, which was a unique way of seeing it, which again you wouldn't get at home unless someone's standing behind shaking the sofa going, come on. So yeah,
actually, if you paid me £15, I'd do that, you know. If for a second job, I'll just come and shake your chair and I'll splash some water in your face if you want.
Oh, literally. Godzilla spit in my face. Perfect. I was like, thank you.
I've never tried one of those gimmicks in I've tried them in other movies, but I've never tried it for horror, so I don't know whether I would like it, because it fits. Because some horror movies are almost constructed like theme park rides anyway, like with the way they build scares and the way they build payoffs, the way they pause for reactions and stuff. But I don't know if I like the 4DX stuff or if I like the gimmicks. I think there's something interesting about them, but I'm almost more concerned about what the gimmicks are doing than what the movies are doing, which kind of affects a viewing of a horror movie for me, because I want to be immersed in that. Inherently takes me out of it a little bit.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. Annabelle Comes Home was a double-edged sword, a two-bladed sword. I was going to say then, because I was very much going, wow, look at the stuff on the side of the screen. That's really interesting, and then missing like a big baddie going woo. So it was double-edged in that sense, but I enjoyed it a lot more because it brought focus to things that maybe I wouldn't have looked at in the scene, and I felt like I was in the room because of it spreading so much. So I would still class it as a good experience, but I totally understand why you might not agree with it as much. What would you say stood out for you as films that you've seen in the cinema that, you know, you've been like, wow, I am so glad that it's been the cinema experience that wouldn't be the same as home?
The one that sticks out for me is Climax, the Gaspar Noé film from a few years ago, because that had like got no showings in the UK. I think I went to the one showing of it in Newcastle, which was like a preview, and I didn't really know what to expect. I'd seen his other movies and I knew I was going to be in for something visceral and indulgent and dramatic. But I was completely blown away by it because it's one of those audio-visual experiences that's just an onslaught of noise and imagery and kind of horror, essentially. Like the violence on display is something that's deeply uncomfortable and you want to look away from, but you can't because you're in the cinema. And the soundtrack is so good that it just accentuates what's going on, and it sounds so good when it's over a proper speaker system. So I saw this and I was completely won over by it. I thought it was probably the best movie he's done, and one of the best horror movies I watched that year because it was so different. You know, it's about this dance troupe who has their punch at a dance party spiked with LSD, and then they all go mad and do some crazy things. But I didn't realize how much it actually impacted the experience seeing it at the cinema until I watched it at home on Netflix, because obviously it came out and I thought, I loved that at the time, I want to, you know, experience it again. So I watched it one night and I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was really good, but it lost something because it wasn't in my face so much, because I could look away, because I could pause it or whatever. I think there's something to be said about, you know, strapping in for 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever and just having a director kind of gleefully assaulting your senses with these movies, and Gaspar Noé is an absolute good one for that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I'd have wanted to see Climax at the cinema. I watched it on your recommendation and was like, oh, watching it at home. So like in the cinema, I feel like I'd be like, oh, please, no more, because it is like unrelenting. I think like, it'd be like watching like Antichrist or like something like that at the cinema. It would just, there's definitely different experiences and different levels to it. And I think that having the choice is a good thing. I think if we kind of shift over to home movies and the good experiences there now in comparison, that'd probably be a good way of like comparing these great cinema experiences with how a home one can scratch up to it as well. Because obviously film is designed for cinemas for the large part. Film is a cinematic experience. It's for theatres. But horror movies, like I say, angle themselves to a home audience. And like, you can see this if you look at directors like Tarantino or people that release on 35mm films. We all had a little think before this and couldn't really come up with many horror movies that were made for 35mm experiences or like made for cinema in quite the same way as the broader film, the genre as a whole. You know what I mean? I feel like, again, it knows its audience. It knows people want to watch these at home and have that experience as well. So I think having a look at these films are kind of designed for that. And also, you know, approaching the title that horror movies that are better at home as well. What would you guys bring up first to say, hey, this is a movie that you should watch at home? This eclipses the cinema experience I had because it was so grotty and horrible in my living room.
Everything's grottier and horrible in my living room, Ash. As a matter of fact, to be honest. You know what? I want to talk about actually, you know, for me, I would say the Babadook and things like the Babadook, like The Witch and stuff. Although I saw a lot of those art house horrors at the cinema and enjoyed them, there is something I think to be said about how those are marketed to the audience expectations. When I went to see the Babadook, I was looking forward to it. I'd heard so much about it and I enjoyed it, but I could just tell that the people in the room weren't expecting what it was. Like this lady, I remember vividly, this lady at the end of it kind of turned to me because we were in a very small cinema and she went, that was crap, wasn't it? And I was like, no, it was really good. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. I think there's kind of a distinction between, you know, the more mainstream blockbuster horror that kind of works for a crowd and gets anyone interested in it, and more of the kind of, you know, you called it elevated horror the other week, that kind of stuff that requires more patience or requires more thought and stuff. And I'm not saying that everyone who goes to see these movies are, you know, dumb or whatever because they didn't get it. It's fine if you don't like them. But I think there are different expectations going into each one of these kinds of movies that for me makes them work better when I watch them at home, because I don't have to be distracted by that, or people sniggering in the background. I can properly focus in and kind of appreciate them a little bit more, because it's a different kind of horror experience that you're getting. So for as much as I enjoyed the Babadook at the cinema, it became one of my favorite films ever when I rewatched it at home, and I got friends around and we all rewatched it together, and I've rewatched it by myself, and I've watched it loads of times now, and you keep picking up new details every single time. And it's kind of, it has the scares and it has the kind of the roller coaster ride of being in a cinema, but it's more than just a kind of one and done thing. It benefits from repeated viewings, and for me, movies of that ilk work better at home, or at least in the long term.
Yeah, that's definitely very fair to say. I think I mentioned earlier that like home invasion movies would be the one for me. Like The Strangers comes to mind straight away, because it's just, when you're sitting at home in a dark house and you turn off the film after you're done with it, you're like, oh, cool. Anyone could get in here then. That's great. The Poughkeepsie tapes, I really can't say the name. I used to call it the Poughkeepsie tapes. The Poughkeepsie tapes, watching that as well, with the bit where he breaks into someone's house, that being in found footage and watching it like you've discovered like a tape yourself and watching it that way. Obviously it's a documentary and mockumentary format as well, but I feel like that's a lot more personal at home. Lake Mungo I really enjoyed at home, because it felt very much like a personal story that was being told to me whilst I was in my living room. And then afterwards I was like, oh my God, there's something around, there's all sorts of spooky things that could happen to me. Ghosts. So I think that would absolutely be the thing that I would shout out would be home invasion movies and found footage feel so much more personal. When they're stretched out on a screen in a cinema, you can't buy that it's been a found tape. Whereas it feels more like someone sent it you as a little grotty secret when you're watching it on your own television than in cinema screens. But yeah, how do you feel about home movies, home horror movies, Kirsten?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'll watch any horror movie at home. That's just my sort of preference. But I do agree with both of you in the sense that, like Paranormal Activity, found footage movies, home invasion movies, stuff like that obviously do hit hard a lot more when you are watching it in your own home. Because you're just sort of like, oh, that could happen to me. Like, I'm also in a house, so this is scary. But what I do think that you don't get from a cinema experience is, like you said, it isn't 100% believable and it doesn't have that impact. But not only that, when you watch any horror movie, just a wild dog. If you watch any horror movie in the cinema, it's that sense of relief that you get when you leave, because you're sort of like, oh, I'm leaving the cinema, so therefore the horror and the darkness can't follow me. I'm out of that terrible place and I get to go home to my lovely home, like nice and safe. But when you're watching a horror movie at home, when that movie finishes, you're still sort of sat there hugging the pillow like, yep, I'm still here. So it's almost like you feel like the place is like contaminated with this, the evil spirits, or like, Freddy's just going to come like walking in the room because it's like, well, I came through the TV. It's happening. And yeah, that's what I like about watching stuff at home, is that once it's finished, you're still sort of sat there like, nope, still scared because I can't leave. And there has been times where I've watched a horror movie and it scared me so much, and I've been at home, that I'm like, I have to go like in the garden or something, or I have to go for a walk to just feel like I have to have that escape, that kind of release, and get away from, oh, this area can't be in the front room at the moment because that place is like contaminated by just evil and scary things. So yeah, for me, that's why I just love watching stuff at home, is knowing that something that you would normally consider as like your safe space, is all of a sudden just like, it's not safe anymore. And every little sound it's almost like the horror movie is continuing on after it's finished, because it's just, it's like you can't listen to a bang or a tweet or anything without thinking like, oh, is that a ghost? Oh, what's that? Is that a demon? Like, oh, I don't know. And then it just goes on for like weeks, months, I don't know. Whereas when you usually leave the cinema, that's it, it's done. It's done. It's out the way. I can go home and be safe.
Oh, absolutely. My old like routine for watching horror movies at home used to be I had to watch Adventure Time for an hour afterwards. Like every single time, I'd be like, oh my God, that's awful.
Cleanse the palate.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when it feels like you've invited a presence into your home to like sit with you. Definitely, like with The Ring, absolutely would be a shout out here. Like as one that you think, oh my God, I've watched the tape. I mentioned it previously on the channel before somewhere in another video. that when I watched The Ring, I watched it with a friend, and when we finished it, my mom rang me on the house phone from a like unknown number and went 7 days down the phone, and I was like, oh, I'm going to die. And like, you wouldn't get that experience in the cinema. It wouldn't feel real in the cinema. But doing it at home absolutely traumatized me. So thanks, Mom. That's a great memory to have. I think also for home movies, as much as you spoke about cinema being good, there are a lot of things that are a special breed of badness that come from cinematic experiences. As much as the actual cinema itself is a great place, and when you do get a good screening and the people that are taking it seriously and enjoying it are having a nice time, it is the best. I would see every movie in a cinema if I could, every horror movie in a cinema if I could, and know that it was going to be a good experience, perhaps. But there is a special brand of people that do go to horror movies to just mess around, throw their popcorn. It's been mentioned a couple of times throughout the podcast that you've had experiences like this. But to move on to that, A Quiet Place, I just have to say A Quiet Place and just like drop the mic, because that was the worst cinema experience I've ever had for a horror movie, of people talking in a film that is called The Quiet Place. Like a quiet is in the title, and they still couldn't do it. But yeah, it's like, what would you say probably, or do you have any stories from terrible cinematic experiences that you wouldn't have had at home, but you know, that like tainted a film for you afterwards?
So many, but I've got to piggyback on your Quiet Place thing, right? Because although I got a mostly okay audience when I was seeing that, no one was really talking. But it was more frustrating because it was almost there, because there was one guy right at the front who was eating his popcorn in the loudest, most obnoxious way ever, and everyone else was fine. But you can't shush someone eating their popcorn. You can't say, could you stop eating that, or could you eat that quieter? And I don't know why, but he mustn't have had any tea that day, because he was getting it by the handfuls. And he must have had about 10 bags of popcorn, man. And he was just shoveling it all in. And then we thought he was getting to the end. And then he did that thing where he tipped it up, and he was getting, he was messing around with the cardboard or whatever, and he was tipping it in his gob. And he was going all over the place, at least in my recollection of it. And I just thought, I can't wait until this is over so I can never look at popcorn ever again. But there have been some much more tragic ones than that. I remember seeing, have you guys seen Tale of Tales? This came out a few
that really weird ago. One.
Yes, a really weird kind of like anthology sort of thing. It was really good, and I went to see that. But there was this like a mum behind me with her husband and kids, and she was one of those people who, they don't like necessarily talk to the husband or whatever, but they just kind of react to what's going on. So any kind of death or something, there was a big like, what's going on there? Or she can't do that. That's a bit horrible. Just like had a comment for everything. And I was watching it almost blood boiling, kind of just waiting for this film to be over, because she was non-stop talking. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to have to turn around and give her the patented cinema glare before she goes. I've got to look her in the eyes and let her know that she's ruined my day today. So I was priming myself up for it in the chair. The credits were rolling. I heard her kind of rustling and standing up, and I thought, right, now's the time. I'm going to turn around and look. And I turned around and looked, and what I saw was an arse crack, because she stood up and turned around. So even when the film was over, she managed to mug me off. I'll never forget whoever that woman was. I've never forgiven her, because the only thing I have to put to the sound of her talking was a bum. So
nice.
Yes.
Disgusting, to be honest. How about you, Kirsten? Do you have any other bot stories for us?
Well, I mean, obviously there's lots of bad experiences, like you said, people talking, just rudeness of people in general, overpriced food and drinks, etc., etc. But I always remember a film that I went to see in the cinema. I don't even know if people have ever seen this, but it was Splice. And basically my boyfriend recommended it at the time, because he knew how much I loved horror films. We very mistakenly didn't watch any trailers or anything like that about it. We just saw this picture. We thought, oh, that looks creepy. Went to the cinema, and huge red flag, to be honest, is when you walk in a cinema and there's only like 3 or 4 people in there, and you're just like, this may not be very good. But we sort of sat down. We thought, well, it's been out for a little while. Maybe it's, people have just kind of, got bored of it or whatever. And it was just the worst film I have ever seen. And it got to the point where we sort of braced ourselves for being scared. And then it got to I don't really know what this is about. And then it just got to the kind of like WTF moment where you're like, what the hell is going on? And then to be honest, by the end of it, we were all talking to each other in the cinema, just looking at each other. Do you know what's going on? No, mate, I don't know what's going on. That's stupid, isn't it? We're like, yeah, I don't really know. And we were just all sort of like, every time something happened, we were sort of looking at random people in the cinema like, I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. And it was just awful. And it got to the end, and well, we again grin and bared it, even though I absolutely hated it. Grin and bared it because I've spent money on this. I've spent money on the snacks. I've spent money on the film. You have to watch it. And yeah, I've just never felt so deflated by the like. As soon as it finished, I just sat there. We looked at each other and we were like, "Well, that was crap, wasn't it?" And it was just. I just hate it. There's nothing worse than that feeling of like I have completely just wasted my own time and money, and I just hate it. That's just the one thing. Like you said, Josh, you want to know, and you want to go into a cinema and just hope to God that it's going to be good. And there is nothing worse than just having, like, even within the first few minutes of entering the cinema, thinking, I've made a mistake here. This is not going to be fun. This is not going to be enjoyable. I already feel like my money's just been flushed down the drain. Yeah, it was horrible. I would recommend watching Splice simply just for the fact of how awful it is. It's almost like I just couldn't work out. Is it a horror? Is it a comedy horror? I don't know. I still don't know. It's just it was so confusing. And yeah, so that's always going to be the one that sticks out in my mind. And even when now we talk about it, we're like, do you remember when we went to see Splice? Yeah, that was a bad idea. Yeah, it's Splice for me.
Oh, that's fair. That is very fair. I think for like watching horror movies at home, the worst problem you can come up against is if you're streaming and your internet drops out. So at least you know that you've created the perfect environment if you're at home, because you can make it yourself. You can wait till night falls and watch it then, or watch it in the daytime and try and like avoid the reflection on the TV and make it less scary for yourself so you can cope with it as well. I feel like it's the home experience is a very patented, tailored one to yourself that kind of fits horror's narrative quite well, and obviously is angled towards it as well. Would you guys say you've changed your mind on whether you prefer cinema or home, or have we just kind of espoused the good and bad of both, and we'll still continue to watch most horror movies at home and then go and see the biggies at the cinema?
Yeah, I agree. Pros and cons for both. There are so many things that I'd watch at home that I would never usually give the time of day at the cinema, just browsing Netflix or streaming services, like you said. But at the same time, there is something special, in my opinion, about being strapped down, having to be subjected to whatever's on the screen, not being able to look away or pause it or whatever, and just knowing you're in for the ride. So both are good. They're all good horror movies, Brent. You know what I mean?
I miss the cinema. This has literally just been a podcast designed to go, oh, remember the cinema, remember when that was good.
Remember the good old days.
Yeah, the video on demand thing that's going on at the moment, I'm really loving. I'm really loving being able to still watch horror movies and enjoy them in the home space as well. But yeah, I do miss the cinema. And as much as there are plenty that are geared to a home experience, you're not going to get Godzilla throwing you off a seat whilst you're at home, unless pay Josh 15 quid, obviously he's going to shake it. But yeah, nah, it's there's definitely good and bad to both, and I think that horror lends itself so well to home watching is just something that's definitely in its favor. What have you guys watched, like, just to finish this up, what have you guys watched recently or has come out recently that you've kind of picked up on video on demand, and that you can kind of end this podcast saying this is what you guys should watch, as just some recommendations to fling out there?
Oh, all that comes to mind are things that you shouldn't watch. You shouldn't watch fear.com.com.
Fear.com.com.
You shouldn't watch, what else was it? I think it was DeadCon. But I mentioned it in a podcast one of the other ones we did. But Rabid, that was such a good surprise for me. That it at least came out in the UK on video on demand this year. And I rented it one night just on a whim because I wanted something horror to watch, and nothing on Netflix looked good. And I'd heard good things about this. And it's a remake of a David Cronenberg movie. And as a result, it is very body horror heavy. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I would give this a go. It's very silly as well, and it's got a very noticeable low budget. But it works in its favor for me. I think it's quite charming. It's very gory in the latter half, and it leaves you with some very interesting images, I think.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. How about you, Kirsten? Anything you want to shout out?
Not film-wise, but I will shout out good old Shudder because I have been addicted to that recently. I have been watching Creepshow, which has just been brilliant. It is just so overly goofy and gory, and it's brilliant. If you just want a good old-fashioned, like, obviously it's all brand new. It has some brilliant actors in it. They've got some proper A-list actors in these, as well as the Twilight Zone, which I don't think was on Shudder, but they did a new series of Twilight Zone with Jordan Peele, which is also like, mwah, chef's kiss, perfect. So yes, anything on Shudder, but give Creepshow, the new series, a go, as well as the latest Twilight series. They are brilliant. They proper, just, it gets that itch, you know, that little itch where you just like, I just want something easy, just want something silly and goofy. It's perfect. Love it.
Hearing you say Twilight series is giving me sparkly vampire flashbacks. Then I was like,
Twilight Zone.
But no, I think for me personally, I watched a few things that have come out in the past couple of months. One, most recently, was The Wretched. Which I bring up as a home experience because I went to sleep watching it, which I can't do at the cinema, which I love. I love being able to have a nap in the middle and come back to it afterwards. I watched it properly afterwards, but I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but you can have a nap whilst you're watching a horror movie. And The Wretched, it was a great little film. It was a great grotty little film about a creepy woman who lives next door to this rambunctious teen who he thinks is like an evil entity thing, and it kind of gets a bit like spooky towards the end. It's kind of it takes its time to get there, and it's not perfect, but it is a really great movie. And I think it's doing really well with drive-in cinemas as well in America, which is a whole different topic that I would love drive-in cinemas to be a thing or be able to go to them at the moment. It would be wonderful. Other than that, it would be Sea Fever if you want some sea horror with tentacles in it, and We Summon the Darkness. It's good. It's good stuff. And We Summon the Darkness, which is it's a really great satanic panic home invasion movie. If you just want something light and easy that has a spooky edge with some, you know, some rituals and stuff, watch We Summon the Darkness, because I had a good time with that. But yeah, that's what we've been watching, and that is our opinion on home horror movies and cinema horror movies. And yeah, just what do you think about them? Do you think horror movies are better at home? Do you think horror movies are better in the cinema? Do you miss the cinema? Do you wish it was open again and we could have those experiences? Or are you quite happy with all these video on demand choices? You let us know in the comments section below, and we'll be back again next week with some more spooky shenanigans from the Trident of Terror.
I thought of a good one. I don't know if it's been said, but the Scream team. Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Scream team.
Scream team. Scream team. The what was it? The gruesome threesome. Scream team's quite good. There's all sorts there. I said quite good. That's very good. Sorry, Kirsten.
Thank you. I'm so proud of myself.
When you said that, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen that. What film is that? And then realised you meant for the three of us. So my whole reaction was like, oh. But yes, from Scream Team, there we go. No more tridents here. Thank you for watching. Come back again soon. Let us know what you think. And if you have any questions you want us to answer or topics you want us to cover, then please use the hashtag WCHorror on Twitter or at us in and just send some questions because we love that. For now, though, I've been Ash. You can find me on Twitter at Ash Millman. This has been Kirsten.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Kirsten Rea with 2 A's.
Lovely. And this has been Josh as well.
You can follow me at Josh Broon with 2 O's, and also watch a film called Why Don't You Just Die? I forgot to recommend it. It slipped my mind, but that also, I'm going to add that on to the last point. Enjoy it. Follow me on Twitter if you want. I don't care. And also, bye. I've just completely messed that entire thing up.
No, that's lovely. Thank you. Extra recommendations. They keep coming past. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.